and Venezuela has been in technical default since 2017. We owe more than $15 million. For Venezuelans have had to learn to live with just a few hours of electricity per day in very many parts of the country. And we've learned to protect ourselves from daily extortion from the armed Colombian groups or the organized crime groups, but also elements of the state. So many families only have one meal per day below the calories that they need, affecting their nutrition, which is getting worse day by day. Humanitarian programs are not sufficient. And then 5, there's no checks and balances between government departments. The government has captured all institutions, beginning with the justice institutions and also the oil company responsible for the majority of income for the country. In order to maintain control and the impunity of these illicit operations, a repressive system that's getting worse and worse is being applied. And to date, there are more than 1,000 political prisoners. At the end of the year, 26 people died during torture or because a lack of medical care. United Nations has documented many of these cases. We need a transparent state that is accountable, that will guarantee the rule of law and human rights, that will protect public goods for everyone without privilege, a system that's autonomous and independent. We need investment in building capacity that will enable us to have a dignified life. We must respect the will of the Venezuelan people to live in peace and democracy. And finally, a request to you. Freedom for all political prisoners in the country. Thank you very much.
I thank Ms. Freitas for her briefing. I now give the floor to those council members who wish to make statements. I give the floor to the representative of Colombia.
Mr. President, Colombia would like to thank Somalia in your quality as President of the Security Council for having quickly responded to our request to convene this emergency meeting, as well as thanking China and Russia for their support for holding of this meeting. And we wish you, Mr. President, a successful month managing the work of the Council at a particularly delicate time for international peace and security. I'd also like to thank Undersecretary General for Political Affairs and Peace Building of the United Nations and the invited briefers. We thank them all for their briefings. This is the first time Colombia is taking the floor in the Security Council as a non-permanent member for the period 2026-2027. Colombia is taking on this responsibility with a deep
act of aggression due to a fear of angering.
Underscores the importance of dialogue, the peaceful settlement of disputes, and respect for constitutional and institutional frameworks. Mr. President, the complex situation in Venezuela requires a comprehensive response that is both inclusive and nationally owned. We continue to hold that a sustainable and peaceful resolution can only be found through constructive dialogue among Venezuelans themselves, with genuine respect for the aspiration and rights of the Venezuelan people, and with the constructive support of the international community. The A3 expresses its solidarity with the people of Venezuela and reiterates the African Union's commitment to peace, stability, and mutual respect among nations and regions. It's important for all parties, both within Venezuela and in the broader international community, to exercise restraint and responsibility, upholding international law and avoiding any action that could escalate tension or threaten regional stability. The A3 stands ready to support all efforts within this Council and in cooperation with regional partners to facilitate a peaceful, inclusive, and lasting resolution to the situation in Venezuela. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Liberia for the statement and now give the floor to the representative of the United States.
Mr. President, thank you for chairing. And I particularly want to thank you, Mr. Freitas, for your briefing. And I'll point out that Mr. Freitas is in exile, having fled the regime. Thank you for your courage, and thank you for shedding a light on the true atrocities of the illegitimate Maduro regime. This past weekend, colleagues, the United States successfully carried out a surgical law enforcement operation facilitated by the U.S. military against two indicted fugitives of American justice, narco-terrorist Nicolás Maduro and Celia Flores. Colleagues, Nicolás Maduro is responsible for attacks on the people of the United States, for destabilizing the Western Hemisphere, and illegitimately repressing the people of Venezuela. As Secretary Rubio has said, there is no war against Venezuela or its people. We are not occupying a country. This was a law enforcement operation in furtherance of lawful indictments that have existed for decades. The United States arrested a narco-trafficker who is now going to stand trial in the United States in accordance with the rule of law for the crimes he's committed against our people for 15 years. A similar action was taken in 1989 against Manuel Noriega. He was arrested, indicted, convicted in a court of law, served in prison in the United States and in Panama, and the Panamanian people, the American people, are safer for it. And undeniably, the region was more stable. This law enforcement action was directed consistent with the President of the United States' responsibility as Commander-in-Chief to protect Americans at home and abroad against a fugitive who is directly responsible for narco-terrorism that has killed hundreds of thousands of Americans and created destabilizing violence throughout our hemisphere. Nicolás Maduro and his co-defendant, Celia Flores, have been transferred here to the United States to stand trial for their crimes. Maduro was indicted by a grand jury in the Southern District of New York and faces very serious criminal charges for his involvement in a wide-ranging conspiracy to conduct narco-terrorism, to traffic cocaine and other drugs, and conducting international weapons trafficking. The overwhelming evidence of his crimes will be presented openly in U.S. court proceedings. Colleagues, Maduro is not just an indicted drug trafficker. He was an illegitimate so-called president. He was not a head of state. For years, Maduro and his cronies have manipulated Venezuela's electoral system to maintain their illegitimate grip on power. In fact, just 2 years ago in 2024, a UN panel of experts report found that the election in that year was absolutely and completely a farce and fell well short of the most basic transparency and integrity measures essential to upholding credible elections. If the UN and the United Nations in this body confers legitimacy on an illegitimate narco-terrorist and the same treatment in this charter of a democratically elected president or head of state, what kind of organization is this? We should note that over 50 countries, many nations, including the European Union, including a number of Latin American countries in the region, and of course the United States, again, over 50 countries rejected the legitimacy of Maduro's re-election following the disputed 2024 elections and do not recognize him as Venezuela's legitimately elected president. Maduro unlawfully refused to peacefully cede power after the Venezuelan people voted him out of office in the 2024 election. So therefore, Maduro was a fugitive from justice. He is the head of a vicious foreign terrorist organization, Cartel de los Soles. This regime-sponsored enterprise coordinates with and relies on other vicious criminal organizations, namely Tren de Aragua, again, among others, to carry out its objective of using illegal narcotics as a weapon against the United States. And for its part, Tren de Aragua is a designated foreign terrorist organization with thousands of members, many of whom have unlawfully infiltrated the United States and are conducting irregular warfare and undertaking hostile actions against the American people and against the United States. It's terrorizing criminals commit brutal crimes, including murders, kidnappings, extortions, and human, drug, and weapons trafficking. This administration, President Trump, will not stand for it. In fact, in March of 2025, President Trump declared that Tren de Aragua is quote, Tren de Aragua is undertaking hostile actions and conducting irregular warfare against the territory of the United States, both directly and at the direction, clandestine or otherwise, of the Maduro regime in Venezuela. Maduro and his cronies have partnered with some of the most violent and prolific drug traffickers and narco-terrorists in the world for decades, facilitating the flood of illegal drugs coming in the United States, estimated to be several hundred tons annually. He has become rich, incredibly wealthy, off the misery of untold numbers of Americans, Venezuelans, and others, aiding and abetting international terrorist organizations like Hezbollah, coordinating with corrupt Iranian officials, and other malign actors to influence not only the region, but to malignly influence the United States. In fact, in its own 2025 World Drug Report, the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime identified Venezuela as a key trafficking route in the Western Hemisphere for illegal drugs, predominantly cocaine, entering the United States and increasingly Europe. As Secretary Rubio stated just yesterday, this is the Western Hemisphere. This is where we live. And we're not going to allow the Western Hemisphere to be used as a base of operation for our nation's adversaries and competitors and rivals of the United States. You can't turn Venezuela into the operating hub for Iran, for Hezbollah, for gangs, for Cuban intelligence agents, and other malign actors that control that country. You cannot continue to have the largest energy reserves in the world under the control of adversaries of the United States, under the control of illegitimate leaders and not benefiting the people of Venezuela, and stolen by a handful of oligarchs inside of Venezuela. But it doesn't stop there. Numerous UN and international human rights organizations have issued reports documenting serious human rights abuses by the Maduro regime, including reports of extrajudicial killings, political prisoners, torture, and arbitrary and unlawful detentions. In fact, over 8 million Venezuelans have fled the country, destabilizing their neighbors in the region and creating the world's largest refugee crisis. Members of this council, colleagues, the United States wants a better future for Venezuela. We believe a better future for the people of Venezuela and for the people of the region and the world is stabilizing the region and making the neighborhood that we live in a much better and safer place. And this is why millions of Venezuelans that have fled this brutal regime are celebrating and cheering around the world as this body pontificates, including those celebrating are including in my home state of Florida, where hundreds of thousands of Venezuelans have fled this regime's brutality. I want to reiterate, President Trump gave diplomacy a chance. He offered Maduro multiple off-ramps. He tried to de-escalate. Maduro refused to take them. President Trump made it clear that the narco-terrorism must stop, and yet it continued. The United States will not waver in our actions to protect Americans from the scourge of narco-terrorism and seeks peace, liberty, and justice for the great people of Venezuela. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of the United States and now give the floor to the representative of Panama.
Gracias, señor.
Thank you, Mr. President. We'd like to extend a warm welcome to the representatives of Bahrain, Colombia, Liberia, Latvia, and the Democratic Republic of Congo, and who have joined the Security Council as elected members and who are joining us today in the chamber. And we congratulate Somalia on assuming the presidency of the Security Council this month. We'd like to thank Under Secretary General for Political Affairs, Rosemarie DiCarlo, for her detailed report representing Secretary General Antonio Guterres. She's briefed us on the situation under discussion today. We're also very grateful for the very valuable presentations by Mr. Jeffrey Sachs and Ms. Mercedes de Freitas. In this context, the Republic of Panama would like to refer to the situation that has taken place in the territory of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, which is of concern due to its possible impact on peace and regional stability. However, in the light of the unfortunate reality of the facts that we have seen, we now need to turn our attention constructively towards the future of Venezuela. However, it's important to point out that in terms of a constant principle of our foreign policy, Panama would like to reiterate our unfailing commitment to multilateralism, to the sovereignty of states, and to the unrestricted respect for international law, especially the principles enshrined in the United Nations Charter, including non-intervention, respect for territorial integrity, and the prohibition of the use of force. This is mentioned in Article 2 of the United Nations Charter. These principles are, and they continue to be, the indispensable framework for the peaceful coexistence between nations. Panama also believes it's necessary to highlight that the situation Venezuela is facing is unfolding in an environment marked by the disregard for the will of its people, as well as by a sustained erosion of democratic institutions. In this regard, Panama reiterates that it does not and will not recognize the authoritarian and illegitimate regime that has held Venezuelan men and women hostage, plunged them into one of the gravest political, social, humanitarian, and security crises in our region. Unfortunately, we have witnessed how the situation has gradually deteriorated under the regime, especially over the last year, with increased systemic erosion of democracy, the hollowing out of institutions, and the rise of authoritarian and repressive practices, which have contributed to an unfortunate outcome and therefore cannot be ignored by the international community. In particular, it is essential to call for the unconditional release of persons detained for political reasons. Many of them have been deprived of their liberty merely for raising their voices in a context in which dissent is not tolerated. From this moment on, we must demand that all political prisoners that the regime continues to hold hostage, Venezuelans and foreigners alike, be released without delay. Their physical well-being and safety must be guaranteed. Likewise, freedom of expression and the unequivocal respect for human rights must be immediately ensured. In this context, Panama underscores that its position does not stem solely from a principled democratic solidarity, but also from direct impact. A Panamanian citizen, Mr. Olmedo Núñez, remains arbitrarily detained in Venezuela without formal charges, without due process, without full access to a defense, and without effective consular guarantees. Added to this is the human impact of a multidimensional crisis that has forced around 9 million Venezuelans, men and women, to leave their homes, compelled to live in displacement and vulnerability as a consequence of the institutional and social collapse generated by the regime. A crisis that has had significant regional repercussions, reflected both in the irregular migration flows from south to north of a significant number of Venezuelan nationals, as well as reverse migration movements, including also a lot of Venezuelans, the effects of which are felt particularly in countries of transit and destination that this affects, including Panama. And this has decisively contributed to illegal migration. In the face of this reality, Panama issues a clear and firm call for Venezuela's short-term future to be fully democratic. Power emanates from the people, and as stated by His Excellency, the President of the Republic of Panama, José Raúl Molino, the people, the true sovereign, have already spoken at the polls, granting an indisputable victory with 70% of the votes on July 28, 2024, to the opposition candidate, Mr. Edmundo González Urrutia, as well as to Maria Corina Machado, who was prevented by the regime from running despite having won the primary with 93% of the votes on October 22, 2023. Additionally, the popularity of both has increased in recent months, including among police and military sectors. The elected government has the teams and work programs ready to be implemented immediately, guaranteeing an orderly transition that provides the rule of law, respect for human rights, and confidence. In line with this commitment, Panama proudly safeguards the electoral records that reliably certify said victory as testimony to the inalienable right of the Venezuelan people to determine their own political destiny. Recognizing any authority other than that of the elected president would amount to legitimizing electoral fraud, normalizing authoritarianism and undermining the universal principle of free elections as the source of legitimacy. Likewise, any attempt to establish a permanent government headed by figures from the repressive apparatus, such as Delcy Rodriguez, would constitute continuity of the system and not a genuine transition. Any political solution must be peaceful, it must be democratic, and led by the Venezuelans, with the responsible assistance of the international community, including the United Nations and regional mechanisms such as the Organization of American States. Panama does not wish and would like to avoid a scenario in which Venezuela's reality simply evolves into a change from one crisis to another, one crisis replacing another. There can be no genuine transition with Madurismo if it remains, or if we have the same power structures preserved under new names. Any arrangement that keeps figures associated with the repressive apparatus at the center of governance would, in practice, constitute continuity of the system and not a real transition. Comparative experience shows that merely nominal transitions tend to prolong conflicts, intensify migratory flows, and perpetuate regional instability to the detriment of international peace and security. Panama will always stand in solidarity with an orderly and democratic transition process, anchored in the popular will already expressed at the polls on July 28, 2024, aimed at restoring democratic institutions through an interim period strictly limited in time, the sole purpose of which is to create the conditions necessary for the effective exercise of the Venezuelan people's right to self-determination. As a country that recovered its democracy and sovereignty, Panama can state clearly that there can be no peace without legitimacy, nor legitimacy without democracy, and that every democracy is ultimately based on respect for the popular will. Mr. President, Panama, due to our commitment to multilateralism and international law, in its capacity as member of the Security Council, will continue to contribute responsibly to collective efforts aimed at preserving peace, strengthening democracy, and supporting legitimate and sustainable solutions anchored in the sovereign will of peoples and respect for international law. Thank you very much.
I thank the representative of Panama for the statement and now give the floor to the representative of Latvia.
Thank you, Mr. President. At the outset, I would like to congratulate Somalia on assuming the presidency of the United Nations Security Council in January, and wish you all success. Latvia takes its seat on the Council with a profound sense of honor and responsibility for this role. And let me thank Under-Secretary General Rosemarie DiCarlo for today's briefing on behalf of the Secretary General, and I thank the invited briefers. The Security Council bears primary responsibility for the global efforts to uphold peace, security, and rule of law worldwide. Latvia recalls that under all circumstances, the principles of international law and the UN Charter must be upheld. All efforts now focus on ensuring de-escalation and stability in Venezuela based on inclusive dialogue and broad societal support. Latvia encourages all relevant actors to prioritize diplomatic efforts and work collectively towards a peaceful, democratic, and sustainable future for Venezuela. Latvia stands in solidarity with the people of Venezuela and their right to freedom and democracy, rights that were not respected by the Maduro regime during 2024 presidential elections and before, and which remain unmet to this day. The regime of Nicolás Maduro was rooted in mass repression, corruption, organized crime, including drug trafficking, and posed a grave threat to security of the region and the world. It has repeatedly violated the UN Charter and undermined international law, including through open support for Russia's aggression against Ukraine. The Maduro regime does not represent the will of the Venezuelan people and has relied on widespread, systematic repressions of human rights across the country to maintain power. 8 million Venezuelans have been forced to flee the country since 2014. Latvia also remains committed to working jointly together with partners to counter global transnational organized crime networks, including in Latin America and Caribbean. Such criminal activities place the lives of countless people at grave risk, particularly women and children. Addressing these challenges requires sustained cooperation in full respect of international law. Latvia continues to closely monitor the situation in Venezuela and stands prepared to continue working with its partners to support a peaceful, democratic, and just transition that reflects the aspirations of the Venezuelan people. And I thank you.
I thank the representative of Latvia for her statement and now give the floor to the representative of Denmark.
Thank you, Mr. President. And let me also thank Under-Secretary General Di Carlo for her briefing on behalf of the Secretary General. We also listened carefully to the briefing by Ms. de Freitas and Mr. Sachs. Mr. President, Denmark joins the Secretary General in expressing deep concern over the evolving situation in Venezuela. Since this Council met to discuss the situation 2 weeks ago, we have seen a drastic escalation, culminating in a large-scale military operation on January 3rd. At our last meeting, Denmark urged all actors to strictly adhere to international law and to de-escalate tensions and exercise the necessary restraint. Today, we echo the Secretary General in his concern regarding the worrying implications of this military action. Independent of the situation in Venezuela, these developments constitute a dangerous precedent. International law and the UN Charter, as a pillar of the international security architecture, must be respected by all states. Denmark recalls the foundational principle of international law that forbids states from threatening or using force against another state's territorial integrity and political independence. This imperative is enshrined in Article 2, Paragraph 4 of the UN Charter. Members of the UN Security Council have a special responsibility to uphold these principles. The principles of sovereignty, political independence, and territorial integrity must be respected. The inviolability of borders is not up for negotiation. These are universal, sacrosanct principles enshrined in international law. They apply everywhere. Mr. President, once again, Denmark calls on all parties to urgently de-escalate tensions that could threaten peace and stability in the region and beyond. International disputes should be settled by peaceful means, as stated in the UN Charter. We further call on all parties to exercise maximum restraint and to engage in dialogue and diplomacy. Denmark takes note of official statements from the United States government stating that the military operations are to combat drug trafficking and stem the illicit flow of illegal narcotics. Denmark shares the priority of combating organized crime and drug trafficking, while reiterating that counter-narcotic efforts, as all other efforts, must be conducted in strict accordance with international law, including the fundamental rules and principles of the UN Charter. Mr. President, against this backdrop, Denmark wishes to recall our solidarity with the people of Venezuela. Denmark does not recognize Nicolás Maduro as the legitimate president of Venezuela following the lack of transparency and integrity in the 2024 presidential elections, which failed to meet basic democratic standards. In Maduro's attempts to cling to power, his authoritarian regime grew increasingly oppressive. His regime bears responsibility for widespread and systematic violations of human rights against his fellow citizens, and he should be held accountable. The victims of the Maduro regime's alleged crimes against humanity have to be heard. The Venezuelan people have a right to democracy and self-determination exercised through peaceful, inclusive, and credible democratic processes, free from fear of political persecution, intimidation, or repression, and external political interference. This includes the rights of Venezuelans alone to determine their political, economic, and social future without coercion, pressure, or manipulation by external actors. No state should seek to influence political outcomes in Venezuela through the use or threat of force or through other means inconsistent with international law. Venezuela's future can be decided only by the Venezuelans. We call on all parties and stakeholders to come together for a negotiated and peaceful transition to democratic rule in a process led by and owned by Venezuelans. At this critical and uncertain time, it is imperative that all parties fully respect human rights and international law. Denmark remains committed to supporting Venezuela and the aspirations of its people on its path to lasting political stability. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Denmark for her statement and now give the floor to the representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, President. I congratulate Somalia on the assumption of the presidency of the Council for the month of January. And I thank our briefers for their remarks. Colleagues, the Venezuelan people have suffered for years. This Council now meets at a pivotal moment for Venezuela's future. Maduro's actions created extreme levels of poverty, violent repression, and failing basic services. His regime's rule precipitated a displacement crisis affecting the whole region. The United Kingdom has long been clear that Maduro's claim to power was fraudulent. To date, Venezuela's National Electoral Council has failed to publish the full results of the July 2024 presidential elections, and independent domestic and international reports also observed significant irregularities and a lack of transparency. President, the United Kingdom wants to see a safe and peaceful transition to a legitimate government that reflects the will of the Venezuelan people. They deserve a government which reflects their vote at the ballot box and delivers a more stable, prosperous future for all Venezuelans. Finally, President, the United Kingdom reaffirms its commitment to international law and the principles enshrined in the Charter of the United Nations. These foundations are essential for maintaining global peace, security, and the rule of law. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom for his statement and now give the floor to the representative of France.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. President. First and foremost, I wish to congratulate you upon your presidency of the Security Council during the month of January. I also wish to thank Madam Rosemary DiCarlo for having conveyed to us the information from the Secretary General of the United Nations on the recent developments which have taken place in Venezuela. Mr. President, France has continued to stand in solidarity with the Venezuelan people as they face the crisis that has been plaguing them for far too many years, specifically, and in particular, since the summer of 2024. On the 20th of July, 2024, the Venezuelan people exercised their right to vote peacefully in order to shape the future of their country. Their right to choose their leaders, nonetheless, has been stripped away from the people by Nicolás Maduro. Must we recall the facts? The electoral process has been was marred by numerous irregularities, and the final counting of votes was marred by a flagrant lack of transparency. In light of the democratic aspirations of the Venezuelan people, Nicolás Maduro has systematically responded with the repression of dissident voices, of members of the opposition, and of civil society, as well as with numerous arbitrary detentions. France has always expressed itself with clarity about the fact that these practices are unacceptable and that respect for human rights must be upheld. Mr. President, the military operation which has led to the capture of Nicolás Maduro runs counter to the principle of peaceful dispute resolution and runs counter to the principle of non-use of force. The proliferation of violations of the Charter of the United Nations and of violations of international law by states vested with responsibility as permanent members of the Security Council chips away at the very foundation of the international order. Contravening the principles of the Charter, including the principle of respect for independence and the territorial integrity of states, undermines the foundation of the United Nations and weakens international peace and security. France remains faithful and committed to respect for the Charter of the United Nations and of the principle of peaceful dispute resolution. We have an obligation to uphold these principles at all times and in all places. Respect for these principles is indispensable. Mr. President, France wishes to reiterate our commitment to respect for the will of the Venezuelan people. The transition which is currently being opened up for Venezuela needs to be peaceful and democratic and carried out in a manner which respects the choice of the Venezuelan people, a sovereign people. This transition must be led by and for the Venezuelans. France stands ready, alongside states in the region and our partners at the European Union, to uphold dialogue with a view to the restoration of the free, democratic expression in Venezuela. We stand ready to support regional stability. This also needs to be the role of the Security Council. Thank you.
I thank the representative of France for the statement and now give the floor to the representative of Bahrain.
سيد الرئيس أود بداية
Mr. President, I wish to take this opportunity to congratulate first and foremost the Federal Republic of Somalia on its presidency of the Security Council during this month of January. We wish you every success. We also wish to take this opportunity to thank delegations whose mandate at the Council ended, namely Algeria, Guyana, the Republic of Korea, Sierra Leone, as well as Slovenia. We wish to thank them for their significant contributions to the attainment of the goals and the mission of the Council. I also wish to thank Madam Rosemary DiCarlo, Undersecretary General for Political and Peace-Building Affairs, for her valuable briefing related to the latest developments which have taken place at in the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, and I wish to thank other briefers as well. We appreciate the reaffirmation by His Excellency the Secretary General of the United Nations, reaffirmation of the commitment to the fundamental principles of the Charter of the United Nations, a commitment to the peaceful diplomatic resolution of disputes. The Kingdom of Bahrain supports the call of the Secretary General for all stakeholders in Venezuela to engage in inclusive dialogue which guarantees respect for international law, and this in order to ease tensions, to preserve regional stability, and to avoid any potential adverse repercussions for security and stability in the region. The Kingdom of Bahrain also extends its support for efforts undertaken at the regional and international levels in order to reduce tensions and to enhance diplomatic means in order to provide for international peace and security. The Kingdom stresses the importance of the promotion of international cooperation in order to support all regional and international efforts which are geared towards combating international organized crime, trafficking in drugs, as well as scourges which are related to the this. This undermines the stability of societies, undermines achievement of sustainable development. Therefore, these issues need to be dealt with in accordance with international relevant conventions. By way of conclusion, the Kingdom of Bahrain reaffirms our support for regional and international efforts to achieve a political, lasting solution in the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. This needs to be achieved through regional cooperation and with respect for national sovereignty. The goal is to provide for security and stability in Venezuela, to avoid risks of conflict and division, to protect civil peace, and to contribute to the preservation of regional security and stability, as well as international peace and security. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Bahrain for the statement and now give the floor to the representative of Pakistan.
Thank you, Mr. President. Allow me to begin by congratulating Somalia on its assumption of the presidency for this month and assuring you of my delegation's full support and cooperation. We welcome the new members joining the Council. I thank Undersecretary General Rosemary DiCarlo for reading out the remarks of the Secretary General and the valuable briefing. We also take note of views shared by Mr. Jeffrey Sachs and Ms. Mercedes de Freitas. I welcome the participation of the permanent representative of Venezuela alongside the representatives of other countries from the region and beyond in the meeting. Mr. President, Pakistan views the recent developments in Venezuela with profound concern. In a world already beset by multiple crises, escalating tensions and instability in the Caribbean do not augur well for regional and international peace and security. The UN Charter enjoins us to refrain from the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state. The UN Charter also binds member states to sovereign equality, non-interference in the internal affairs of others, and settlement of international disputes by peaceful means. Unilateral military action contravenes these sacrosanct principles and the doctrine of sovereign immunity. Such actions set dangerous precedents that risk eroding the foundations of the global legal framework. They also fuel instability, which, as history has shown time and again, can lead to unpredictable and uncontrollable outcomes for years to come. Mr. President, at this critical juncture, the path forward must be one of dialogue and diplomacy. Durable solutions to political differences can only be found through peaceful means, with full respect for the will of the Venezuelan people, free from any external interference. We hope that Latin American and the Caribbean region, as a zone of peace, will remain free from conflict and confrontation and continue its march towards enhanced regional cooperation and improved prosperity for the people. We urge all parties to exercise maximum restraint, de-escalate tensions, pursue peaceful coexistence, refrain from any actions that could exacerbate the volatile situation, and engage in dialogue, including by utilizing the sincere offers of mediation. The good offices of the Secretary General also always remain available for that purpose. Lastly, Mr. President, I affirm Pakistan's commitment to contributing constructively to the discharge of the Security Council's primary responsibility for addressing the threat to international peace and security by diffusing tensions, promoting Pacific settlement, and upholding respect for international law and the UN Charter. Peace and stability of Venezuela and the welfare and prosperity of its people, with full ownership, must be the overriding objective of all efforts. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Pakistan for the statement and now give the floor to the representative of Greece.
Thank you, Mr. President. At the outset, I would like to congratulate Somalia for assuming the presidency of the Council for the month of January, and I would like to welcome the newly elected members joining the Council. I would also like to thank USG DiCarlo for her briefing on behalf of the Secretary General, as well as Mr. Sachs and Ms. De Freitas for their remarks. Mr. President, Greece is closely monitoring developments in Venezuela. We urge all actors to exercise maximum restraint and to refrain from actions that would deepen the crisis and undermine prospects for peace and stability. Greece reiterates that the Charter of the United Nations and international law, including human rights law, must always be respected. We also recall the obligation of all parties to protect civilians, especially in times of heightened tensions. Greece shares the priority of combating transnational organized crime and drug trafficking, which pose a significant security threat worldwide. We reiterate that these challenges should be addressed through sustained cooperation in full respect of international law. Mr. President, Greece firmly believes that dialogue and diplomacy are the only viable tools for a peaceful transition and a sustainable resolution of the crisis. We join the Secretary General in encouraging all actors in Venezuela to engage in inclusive and meaningful dialogue in full respect of human rights, democratic principles, and the rule of law. We have long been clear that Nicolás Maduro's and illegitimate president's claim to power lacks legitimacy. Greece has not recognized the results of the rigged elections of July 28, 2024, and has always supported initiatives aimed at achieving a democratic solution for Venezuela. We stand firmly with the people of Venezuela in their pursuit of a democratic future, and we express the hope that the recent events will lead to this effect. The voices of all Venezuelans need to be heard, and they deserve governance that reflects their will through peaceful and inclusive processes. In this spirit, we will continue to support efforts aimed at achieving a peaceful, negotiated transition that ensures the will of all Venezuelans is fully respected. Greece stands ready to support all regional and international efforts aimed at the peaceful resolution of the crisis in line with the Charter of the United Nations and international law. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Greece for this statement and now give the floor to the representative of Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Before coming to the substance of our statement today, I think we need to make an institutional clarification. We note with concern that an attempt is being made to present to the Security Council a supposed representative of civil society, a person whose public career trajectory bears the hallmarks of sustained funding from foreign governments and transnational corporations. This has been the case for years, as well as participation in processes of political destabilization and the promotion of institutional breakdown in her own country. The instrumental use of this person to legitimize narratives of confrontation, justify the use of force, or minimize violations of international law does not contribute in any way to the purposes of this Council or to the strengthening of multilateralism. On the contrary, it erodes the credibility of the debates and distorts the Security Council's mandate entrusted with the maintenance of international peace and security. Mr. President, on January 3rd, 2026 is a date of profound historical significance, not only for Venezuela, but for the international system as a whole. On that day, the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela was the target of an illegitimate armed attack lacking any legal justification by the government of the United States of America, which included bombing of our territory, the loss of civilian and military lives, the destruction of civilian infrastructure, essential infrastructure, and the kidnapping of the constitutional president of the Republic, Nicolás Maduro Moras, and the First Lady, Cilia Flores. Venezuela comes before this Council today with a deep conviction that international peace can only be sustained if international law is respected without exception, without double standards, and without selective interpretations. The events of January 3rd constitute a flagrant violation of the UN Charter, perpetrated by the US government, in particular, the violation of the principle of sovereign equality of states, of the absolute prohibition of the use or threat of use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state, as enshrined in Article 2, Paragraph 4, and a violation of the duty to settle disputes by peaceful means. Similarly, these acts also seriously violate the Geneva Conventions and protocols, as indiscriminate attacks were carried out against the civilian population and assets. International human rights law has also been violated, particularly the right to life, personal integrity, and security. Of particular seriousness is the kidnapping of the President of the Republic by the government of the United States of America, which constitutes a direct violation of an essential norm of the international legal order, namely the personal immunity of heads of state in office. This immunity is not an individual privilege. It is an institutional guarantee that protects the sovereignty of states and the stability of the international system. Its disregard not only affects Venezuela, but also sets an extremely dangerous precedent for all states represented in this chamber, regardless of their size, power, or alliances. Mr. President, General Assembly Resolution 3314 clearly defines as an act of aggression the bombing of the territory of one state by the armed forces of another state, as well as the invasion or occupation, even without formal annexation. The events we are denouncing here unequivocally fit this definition. In 2004, the International Court of Justice affirmed that occupation exists when a state exercises effective control, even without formal annexation or the continuous presence of troops. Security Council Resolution 242, for its part, emphasizes that the acquisition of territory by force is inadmissible, while General Assembly Resolution 2625 establishes that the territory of a state shall not be subject to military occupation as a result of the use of force in contravention of the UN Charter. Allowing such acts to go without an effective answer would amount to normalizing the replacement of law by might, while eroding the very foundations of the collective security system. Today, it is not only Venezuela's sovereignty that is at stake, the credibility of international law, the authority of this organization, and the validity of the principle that no state can set itself up as the judge, party, and executor of the world order are also at stake. Mr. President, we cannot ignore a central element of this US aggression. Venezuela is the victim of these attacks because of its natural resources. Our country's oil, energy, strategic resources, and geopolitical position have historically been factors of greed and external pressure. When force is used to control resources, impose governments, or redesign states, we are faced with a logic that harks back to the worst practices of colonialism and neocolonialism. Accepting such a logic would mean to open the door to a deeply unstable world in which countries with greater military capacities can decide by force the political and economic destinies of other states. This scenario not only threatens Venezuela, it threatens international peace and security as a whole. If the kidnapping of a head of state, the bombing of a sovereign country, human rights violations, and we have actively contributed with the determination and responsibility to international efforts aimed at the return of democracy in Venezuela. In March 2024, when others opted for inaction or ambiguity, Argentina granted diplomatic asylum to 6 Venezuelan opposition leaders, assuming an enormous challenge for our representation in Caracas. Subsequently, after denouncing the fraudulent nature of the result announced in the 28 July 2024 elections and recognizing Edmundo González Urrutia as president-elect, Argentina was expelled from Venezuela. Our embassy, where the asylum seekers remained, was subject to a permanent siege. Despite these pressures, the Argentine Republic maintained its unwavering conviction to continue denouncing the situation in Venezuela and to act in every available international forum so that Venezuela could once again embrace freedom and democracy. Mr. President, this is not the first time that Argentina has addressed this Security Council regarding the situation in Venezuela. On the 23rd of December last, we expressed our deep concern over institutional and humanitarian deteriorating situation, noting the effects of the illegitimate regime of Nicolás Maduro transcended the domestic sphere and negatively affected regional stability, constituting a concrete threat to hemispheric security. In the same vein, President Milei stated at the Mercosur summit that Argentina welcomed the pressure from the United States aimed at freeing the Venezuelan people. Today, the international community faces a new scenario that poses a dual challenge: to support a genuine democratic transition in Venezuela and to contribute to the lasting restoration of peace and security in our region. Faced with both challenges, the Argentine Republic stands ready and willing to cooperate. We reaffirm our firm commitment to the full restoration of institutional normalcy and the rule of law in Venezuela, always safeguarding the freedom, human dignity, and prosperity of the brotherly Venezuelan people, as well as our determination to continue fighting against the scourge of narco-terrorism and those who contribute to its financing. The process that begins today requires the firm and coordinated commitment of all those countries that have accompanied the Venezuelan people in their long struggle, so that Venezuela can leave behind more than 2 decades of political, humanitarian, and social crisis, and can finally be reunited with freedom, democracy, respect for human rights, and economic prosperity. Mr. President, finally, the Argentine Republic requests the authorities responsible for administering the transition in Venezuela contribute to the immediate release of the Argentine citizen Nahuel Gallo, who has been in a situation of enforced disappearance since the 8th of December 2024, in clear violation of his human rights, and that his prompt and safe return to our country be guaranteed. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Argentina and now give the floor to the representative of Chile.
Thank you, Mr. President. Chile would like to thank Somalia for convening this informational briefing under the item Threats to International Peace and Security. We'd also like to thank Madam Rosemary DiCarlo, USG for Political and Peacebuilding Affairs, as well as the briefings from Mr. Jeffrey Sachs and Ms. Mercedes de Freitas. President, Chile would like to express our deep concern and firm condemnation of the unilateral military action taken by the United States in the territory of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. We also reiterate consistently our firm commitment to respect for international law, sovereignty and territorial integrity of states, and the peaceful settlement of disputes, the prohibition of the threat or the use of the threat of force, and full respect for human rights. These affirmations are accepted by the majority, and they must maintain their importance in order to preserve international peace and security. We said this on the 23rd of December when we took the floor, and we reiterate this today. Chile does not recognize the Maduro regime, but serious violations of human rights being faced by Venezuela do not have a military solution. They can only be addressed through peaceful, gradual, and inclusive measures that will take into account the legitimate aspirations of the Venezuelan people. Respect for international law does not allow for exceptions, including when it comes to addressing the illegitimacy of a president. Problems must always be solved within the normative framework that we have provided for ourselves as nations. The future of Venezuela must include free elections, citizen participation, and international assistance, and not with actions that could create dangerous precedents or escalate tensions in the region with serious consequences for the population. Chile, as a witness of history and based on our own experience with the loss of democracy, where there was foreign interference that caused extreme damage and pain for the Chilean people, we were able to recover our democracy through a transitional process that was carried out with the assistance of the community, the strength of organized citizens, and through our institutions. Mr. President, Chile would like also to underscore the urgent need to continue with coordinated efforts multilaterally to address transnational organized crime. And we're also convinced that Latin America and the Caribbean must continue to be a zone of peace, because that zone of peace not only serves Latin America and the Caribbean, but the entire world. An armed conflict will have devastating humanitarian consequences in Venezuela and in the region. It will worsen the suffering of the civilian population and worsen even further the displacement, insecurity, and vulnerability aspects of the situation. We reiterate that any differences must be dealt with exclusively through peaceful means in strict respect for international law, the sovereignty of states, and the prohibition of the use or the threat of the use of force. As was recently indicated by the heads of state of Brazil, Chile, Mexico, Uruguay, and Spain, we express our concern with regard to any attempt to control government administration or foreign ownership of strategic assets. This would be against international law and would threaten the political, economic, and social stability of the region. Mr. President, given this complex scenario, Chile welcomes the role that could be played by multilateral fora. And here, particularly, we would refer to the role of the United Nations, and particularly the role that could be played by the Secretary General and by this Council, with the consent of the parties involved to contribute to de-escalating the situation and searching for an understanding that would favor a peaceful and lasting exit to the crisis. Prudent leadership and experience of our organization, as well as the regional organizations and mechanisms, could be very relevant to avoid a further worsening of the situation and to keep open the channels of communication. Chile reiterates its preparedness to support constructive initiatives that will point in this direction and work together with countries of the region and with the international community for stability and mutual understanding and respect for the principles that underpin this organization. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Chile for the statement and now give the floor to the representatives of Brazil.
Mr. President, we'd like to thank Somalia for convening this emergency session of the Security Council. Brazil categorically and firmly rejects the armed intervention in Venezuelan territory in flagrant violation of the Charter of the United Nations and of international law. The bombings on Venezuelan territory and the capture of its president cross an unacceptable line. These acts constitute a very serious affront to the sovereignty of Venezuela and set an extremely dangerous precedent for the entire international community. The Charter of the United Nations establishes as a pillar of the international order the prohibition of the use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state, except in the circumstances strictly provided for therein. The acceptance of actions of this nature would inexorably lead to a scenario marked by violence, disorder, and the erosion of multilateralism, to the detriment of international law and institutions. The effects of the weakening of international governance and cooperation mechanisms are already evident. The record number since the Second World War of 61 active armed conflicts, the unprecedented figure of 117 million people in situations of humanitarian disaster around the world, reflecting the increase in wars, displacement and crimes against humanity, such as the genocide in Gaza, and the global increase in military spending, which is approaching the historical mark of $2.7 trillion. As Brazil has reiterated on numerous occasions, the norms that govern coexistence among states are mandatory and universal. They do not admit exceptions based on ideological, geopolitical, political, economic, or any other kind of interests or projects. They do not admit that the exploitation of natural or economic resources justifies the use of force or the illegal change of a government. The multipolar world of the 21st century, which promotes peace and prosperity, must not be confused with spheres of influence. We cannot accept the argument that the end justifies the means. This reasoning lacks legitimacy and opens the possibility of granting the strongest the right to define what is just or unjust, what is right or wrong, and even to ignore national sovereignties, imposing the decisions to be taken by the weakest. Latin America and the Caribbean have made peace a conscious, lasting, and irreversible choice. The resort to force in our region evokes chapters of history that we believed we'd left behind us and endangers the collective effort to preserve the region as a zone of peace and cooperation, free of armed conflicts, respectful of international law and the principle of non-intervention. Armed interventions in the past have had profoundly negative and lasting consequences. Contrary to freedom and democracy, those interventions produced authoritarian regimes and serious violations of human rights, leaving as a lamentable result thousands of dead, political prisoners, tortured persons and disappeared persons whose families still today search for their loved ones, as well as justice and reparation. For the first time in South America, a profoundly alarming event has occurred. An external armed aggression with the deployment of troops and bombings in a neighboring country contiguous with Brazil, with which we share more than 2,000 kilometers of border. Mr. President, South America is a zone of peace. I insist upon that. We have upheld and will uphold with full determination peace and non-intervention in our region. Furthermore, Brazil does not believe that the solution to the situation in Venezuela lies in the creation of protectorates in the country, but rather in solutions that respect the self-determination of the Venezuelan people within the framework of its constitution. The events of January 3rd transcend the regional sphere. The attack on the sovereignty of any country, regardless of the direction of its government, affects the entire international community. This and other cases of armed intervention against the sovereignty of a country, its territorial integrity, or its institutions must be vehemently condemned. It is up to this Council to assume its responsibility and react with determination, clarity, and obedience to international law in order to prevent the law of force from prevailing over the force of law. Brazil trusts that the future of Venezuela will be built by the Venezuelan people through dialogue, without external interference, and within the framework of international law. Thank you.
For Brazil, for the statement, and now give the floor to the representative of Mexico.
Mr. President, thank you for having convened this emergency meeting of the Council. The government of Mexico has already made its position clear with regard to our condemnation of the military aggression of January 3rd against targets in the territory of Venezuela, in clear violation of Article 2 of the Charter of the United Nations. These actions must not be allowed, as they constitute a severe blow to the Charter and to multilateralism. Mexico would like to clarify the following points. 4 points. Number 1, the prohibition of the threat or the use of force against the sovereignty, territorial integrity, or political independence of any state is the foundation of international law, regardless of the country or the government involved. 2, rhetoric pointing towards the escalation or expansion of military actions, including to other countries in our region, threatens regional stability. 3, the Security Council has the responsibility and, above all, it has the obligation to act decisively and without double standards in the face of serious violations of the Charter, and to restore international peace and security in strict adherence to the provisions of Article 24 and observing Article 27.3. 4. It is for sovereign peoples to decide their destiny and to find peaceful, democratic, and negotiated solutions to their political differences within a on the 23rd of December, in this very body, we set out the sequence and escalation of actions carried out by the United States with the aim of overthrowing by force the legitimate and constitutional change in the constitutional order of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, freely chosen by its people. Its ultimate objective is not the false narrative of combating drug trafficking, but control over Venezuela's land and natural resources, as has been openly and shamelessly declared by President Trump and his Secretary of State. This is an imperialist and fascist aggression with objectives of domination that seeks to revive the U.S. hegemonic ambitions over our America, anchored in the outdated Monroe Doctrine. It also seeks to intimidate and subjugate the governments of Latin America and the Caribbean. Cuba calls for an urgent reaction from the international community against this criminal attack on Venezuela, a peaceful nation that has not attacked the United States or any other country. On all governments, parliaments, social movements, and peoples of the world to condemn the U.S. military aggression against Venezuela and to confront this act of state terrorism that threatens international peace and security and seeks to impose a new doctrine of U.S. imperialist domination in Latin America and the Caribbean and in the world. Mr. President, the recent statements about imperialist plans to steer Venezuela toward a supposed safe, appropriate, and prudent transition are totally unacceptable. In the U.S. vision of domination, this means imposing a puppet government functional to its predatory goals, particularly unrestricted access to and plundering of natural resources that, by right, belong to the Venezuelan people. Determining the destiny of Venezuela is an exclusive right of its people, without external interference. If the U.S. government, lacking any moral authority whatsoever, truly cared about the peace, freedom, and justice of Venezuelan men and women, it would not have bombed that territory with absolute disregard for the lives, sovereignty, and territorial integrity of that nation. I conclude by reaffirming our unwavering adherence to the proclamation of Latin America and the Caribbean as a zone of peace. And Nicaragua supports what was expressed by the interim president of Venezuela, Delcy Rodriguez, calling for the immediate release of the constitutional and legitimate president of Venezuela, Nicolás Maduro, and the first fighter of the country, Celia Flores. All member states of the United Nations have the duty to respect international law, the spirit, the purposes, and principles of the United Nations Charter. the right to sovereignty, self-determination, territorial integrity of states, non-interference, and peaceful coexistence. The Venezuelan people are a dignified people, the people of Bolivar, of Chavez, and of Maduro, and they have never bowed the knee. They defend their right to sovereignty and their right to peace. Nicaragua will always stand with Venezuela. Peace has been deeply damaged, and the human family, the community of nations, the peoples of the world. We urge all of you to
disrupt and dismantle networks that enable transnational crime across the Americas, whose activities have had debilitating effects on the security and stability of the region. Trinidad and Tobago remains steadfast in its support of the United States of America's initiatives that strengthen regional security, reinforce the rule of law, and safeguard the well-being of our societies, the Americas. The government of Trinidad and Tobago, while valuing its long-standing and robust partnership with the United States, remains equally committed to maintaining a constructive and respectful relationship with the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, and continues to uphold peaceful relations with the people of Venezuela. The delegation of Trinidad and Tobago wishes to underscore its long-standing relationship with both the United States and Venezuela, and stands ready to work collaboratively with all partners who share the aspiration of a safer, more prosperous and stable hemisphere. Mr. President, I thank you.
I thank the representative of Trinidad and Tobago, and now give the floor to the representative of
today. Spain would like to express our profound concern about what's happened in Venezuela. And as the Secretary General of the United Nations has noted, it constitutes a very worrying precedent with implications for the region and for the world. Respect for the principles of the Charter of the United Nations, particularly the sovereignty and territorial integrity of states and the prohibition of the use or the threat of use of force, is indispensable to ensure international coexistence. Spain defends the validity of
that contrary to its central premise, it undermines the credibility of the entire system in which we all undertake our international relations. The stability of the international system depends not only on the respect, but on the consistent application of these established legal norms. We all benefit from a rules-based international order based on international law. When we break those norms, we invite anarchy and an environment where might makes right, ignoring the complexity of interrelations and interdependence in our modern world. Mr. President, the unilateral military strikes carried out by the United States of America against Venezuela and the abduction of President Nicolás Maduro and his spouse from Venezuelan territory for transfer to the United States wantonly violates the sovereignty and territorial integrity and independence of Venezuela. These actions are also in stark contrast to our established legal norms, reinforcing the belief that might is right and undermining diplomacy. History has repeatedly demonstrated that military invasions against sovereign states yield only instability and deepen crises. Unlawful unilateral force of this nature undermines the stability of the international order and the principle of equality among nations. Such use of force also undermines the institutional infrastructure established to regulate relations among nations. We have seen examples of these in Libya, Iraq, and countless cases in Africa where foreign interventions and interference create security crises and undermine national governance institutions cultivated through nuanced and complex national contexts. South Africa stresses that allegations of internal governance challenges, human rights concerns, or acts of criminality by a head of state cannot justify a breach of the Charter's prohibition on the use of force, particularly Article 2.4 of the Charter. The peaceful resolution of disputes and internal matters must proceed in accordance with international law and through multilateral mechanisms. Additionally, under international law, a state has exclusive jurisdiction over persons and conduct within its own territory. Any enforcement of domestic law, including arrest by one state within the territory of another state without the state's consent, is an unlawful violation of sovereignty. There are recourse mechanisms at the disposal of states to implement international law. This includes taking action by bringing a case before the International Court of Justice or seeking action from the Security Council. We note the statement issued by a group of concerned countries, mainly those in the Latin American region, most affected by the developments in Venezuela, which reiterates that the situation in Venezuela must be resolved exclusively through peaceful means, through dialogue, negotiation, and respect for the will of the Venezuelan people in all its expressions, without external interference and in accordance with international law. Mr. President, each one of our countries, including our peoples, that are members of this organization and that are bound to its charters, have the right to determine our own democratic and political path. This inherent charter-given right to self-determination cannot and should not be abrogated. If we do not stand up for the sovereign rights of any nations or states when they are undermined and wantonly violated, then which one of us are safe or are guaranteed protection by the principles of the Charter and international law? Failure to act decisively against such violations is tantamount to inviting anarchy and normalizing the use of force and military might as the main form of discourse in international politics. This would be a regression into a world preceding the United Nations, a world that gave us two brutal world wars, and an international system prone to severe structural instability and lawlessness. We cannot afford to proceed into a complex future without the stability and protection afforded by international law. I thank you.
I thank the representative of South Africa for his statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Eritrea.
Thank you, Mr. President. Allow me at the onset to congratulate Your Excellency and the government of the Federal Republic of Somalia on assuming the presidency of the Security Council for the month of January. We also extend our congratulations to Bahrain, Colombia, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Liberia, and Latvia on their election to the Security Council. As this is the first Security Council meeting of the year, allow me to pay tribute to the outgoing members, Algeria, Guyana, the Republic of Korea, Sierra Leone, and Slovenia, for their dedicated service and diligent work throughout the tenure of the Council. I read this statement on behalf of the Group of Friends in Defense of the United Nations Charter. The Group of Friends in Defense of the Charter of the United Nations condemns the most unequivocal and categoric manner the act of aggression perpetrated on 3rd January 2026 against the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela by special forces of the United States of America, which included armed attacks against civilian and military objects in the capital city of Caracas, as well as in various other cities of the Venezuelan territory, and the illegal abduction of the President and First Lady of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, His Excellency Mr. Nicolás Maduro Moros, and Her Excellency Mrs. Celia Flores de Maduro. The member states of the Group of Friends in Defense of the Charter of the United Nations expressed their serious concern for the impact of these series of armed attacks, particularly on civilians and their human rights to life, which have included military assaults with U.S. Special Forces, while emphasizing that such acts constitute a clear breach of international law and of each and every principle governing international relations, including those foreseen in the Charter of the United Nations. The Group of Friends of the Charter of the United Nations reiterates its firm support to the constitutional government of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela under the leadership of President Nicolás Maduro Moros, and emphasize the importance of ensuring strict respect for the inviolability of the immunities accorded to heads of states and government under international law, while renewing its unwavering solidarity with the Venezuelan people in their ongoing struggle for defending their homeland, including through the actions it may take within the framework of international law to exercise its inalienable right to self-defense. The member states of the Group of Friends in Defense of the Charter of the United Nations demand for the immediate cessation of all hostilities against the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, for the full respect for the sovereignty, territorial integrity, political independence, and inalienable right to self-determination of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, for the immediate return of President Nicolás Maduro and First Lady Celia Flores de Maduro to the Venezuelan national territory, and for those responsible for these acts of aggression to be held accountable. The Group of Friends of the Charter of the United Nations firmly reject the remarks delivered by the President of the United States of America during the afternoon of 3rd January 2026, in which he not only threatened with additional airstrikes against the Venezuelan territory, but also claimed to resolve to occupy and govern the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, and to exploit the natural resources and administer the wealth of that sisterly nation in what can only be described as the confession of a clear plan of annexation that foresees, among others, the complete obliteration of the inalienable rights of the Venezuelan people, as well as the fundamental rights of the Venezuelan state as a whole. The member states of the Group of Friends of the Defense of the Charter of the United Nations call on all relevant international bodies, including the Security Council and the General Assembly of the United Nations, to swiftly mobilize in order to uphold the purposes and principles enshrined in the Charter of the United Nations, and to urgently take appropriate measures to avoid further escalation of the situation on the ground, particularly additional acts of aggression against the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, and preserve both regional and international peace and security. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Eritrea for her statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Islamic Republic of Iran.
Thank you. In the name of God, the Compassionate and Merciful, thank you, Mr. President, for convening this emergency and important meeting. We acknowledge the presence of the Undersecretary General, Mr. Carlo, at this meeting and extend our appreciation to Professor Jeffrey Sachs for his informative and insightful briefing. At the outset, I would like to extend my warm congratulations to Somalia on its assumption of the presidency of the Security Council for this month. I also wish to warmly congratulate the newly elected members of the Council, Bahrain, Colombia, Republic of Congo, Latvia, and Liberia on their election. Mr. President, the Islamic Republic of Iran would like to associate itself with the statement delivered by Eritrea on behalf of the Group of Friends in Defense of the Charter of the United Nations, and wishes to make the following remarks in its national capacity. First, the Islamic Republic of Iran condemns in the strongest possible terms the military attack carried out by the United States of America against the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. This illegal act constitutes a state terrorism, a manifest violation of Charter of the United Nations, particularly Article 2, Section 4 and Section 7, and peremptory norms of the international law, and amounts to an internationally wrongful act and a full-fledged act of aggression. Such military aggression against an independent member state of the United Nations establishes a serious breach of regional and international peace and security, with far-reaching consequences for the international system as a whole. Second, the abduction of democratically elected president and the First Lady of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela by the United States constitute a flagrant violation of customary international law, including the principles of the inviolability of the immunities accorded to the heads of a state and government under international law, and represent a grave assault on the sovereign equality of states. The Islamic Republic of Iran recalls Venezuela's inherent right to self-defense and underscores the legal responsibility of the United Nations, in particular the Security Council, to take immediate measures to halt this unlawful aggression and to ensure accountability for all those responsible. Iran also reaffirms its full support for the people and legitimate elected government of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. Third, the United States is openly seeking to substitute its domestic law for international law and the Charter of the United Nations. This represents a serious warning to the international community and to all member states. Such unlawful conduct strikes at the very foundations of the Charter-based international legal order and establishes a dangerous precedent that must be categorically and unequivocally rejected. The so-called declared U.S. policy of peace through strength prescribe the law of the jungle and the rule of force instead of rule of law, and if tolerated and normalized, would render the collective security system established by the Charter ineffective and devoid of purpose. Fourth, the continued inaction and paralysis of the Security Council in the face of the explicit threat and act of aggression by the United States have fostered a dangerous climate of impunity. It has emboldened the United States to persist in unlawful conduct that poses a grave threat to regional and international peace and security. In recent days, the President of the United States had repeatedly issued public threat of the use of force against the Islamic Republic of Iran in manifest violation of Article 2 of the Charter of the United Nations. At the same time, the United States is shedding crocodile tears for the Iranian people and hypocritically claims to support them while maintaining a well-documented record of intervention, the use of force, and the imposition of unlawful unilateral coercive measures against Iran. This includes its direct political, military, and operational support and involvement for Israeli regime unlawful joint war of aggression against Iran between 13 and 24 June 2025, which resulted in loss of civilian life, attacks on civilian infrastructure, and serious violations of fundamental human rights of the Iranian people. Iran reaffirms its inherent right to defend its sovereignty, territorial integrity, and national security, and to protect its people against any foreign interference. The United States of America will bear full responsibility for consequences arising from its unlawful threats and any ensuing escalation. Finally, we unequivocally reject the baseless allegation and unwarranted reference made to Iran by the representative of the United States at this meeting. The facts on the ground are clear, speak loudly for themselves, and cannot be concealed by political rhetoric or manufactured narrative. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Islamic Republic of Iran and now give the floor to the representative of Uganda.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the Non-Aligned Movement, NAM, representing 121 member states united by the shared principle of respect for the sovereignty and territorial integrity of all nations. The Coordinating Bureau of the Non-Aligned Movement, NAM, categorically condemns the act of aggression perpetuated by the United States of America against the Bolivian Republic of Venezuela since the early hours of 3rd January 2026, which included armed attacks against civilian and military locations in the capital city of Caracas, as well as in various other cities of the Venezuelan territory. The Coordinating Bureau of the Non-Aligned Movement notes that attacks in question, which blatantly violate the purposes and the principles enshrined in the Charter of the United Nations, as well as the norms of the international law, constitute an act of war against the Bolivian Republic of Venezuela that undermines both regional and international peace, security, and stability, while also threatening the very right to life of the Venezuelan people. Excuse me. The Coordinating Bureau of the Non-Aligned Movement demands the immediate cessation of all hostilities against the Bolivian Republic of Venezuela, the full respect of the sovereignty, territorial integrity, political independence, and inalienable rights to the self-determination of Bolivian Republic of Venezuela, and that those responsible for those ongoing acts of aggression to be held accountable. The Coordinating Bureau of the Non-Aligned Movement reaffirms the inviolability of the immunities accorded to the heads of states and government under international law, which constitute a fundamental pillar of sovereign equality, peace, coexistence, and stable international relations. These immunities, firmly rooted in customary international law and consistent with the purposes and principles of the Charter of the United Nations, must be respected universally without discrimination, and any actions or measures that undermine or selectively disregard them risk eroding multilateralism, destabilizing international relations, and weakening the international legal order. Excuse me. Mr. President, the Coordinating Bureau of the Non-Aligned Movement reiterates its full solidarity with the people and government of the Bolivian Republic of Venezuela at this critical time, and insists that military solutions are not viable avenues for addressing any issues that may be of concern between members of the international community. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Uganda for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Cuba, who has asked for the floor to make a further statement.
Gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, my delegation feels it must take the floor again to respond to the unfounded accusations formulated by the United States against Cuba. We are indignant that those that have led unilateral aggressions and systematic violations of international law pretend to judge other sovereign states with a totally immoral and irresponsible attitude lacking respect. We fundamentally reject the accusations that Cuba has intelligence assets in Venezuela. These kinds of statements lack any factual base and are a clear attempt to take the eyes of the world off the criminal acts of the United States in the region. Cuba strictly respects the sovereignty, independence, and inalienable right of the Venezuelan people to decide their own destiny, as established by the United Nations Charter. Cooperation between both countries is in multiple spheres, has legitimate bases, and is based on bilateral agreements signed by both parties. As has been declared by the revolutionary government, the 32 combatants that fell in terrorist acts perpetrated by the United States were in missions of the revolutionary forces at the request of Venezuela. Those patriots were heroic in their action, showing solidarity with millions of Cubans. These accusations attempt to suggest that Cuba is involved in this way in Venezuela. We categorically reject that. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Cuba for the statement. There is no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. The meeting is adjourned.
To use the word condemn regarding the U.S. military action on Venezuela. I remember that when Russia launched its military operation against Ukraine, he used the word multiple times. So what's the consideration that he chose not to use the word?
Look,
Thank you.
I think the Secretary General used the words that he used for this particular situation. While situations may differ, I think the consistency of the Secretary General's message in calling on all member states to uphold international law has been very clear. On that note, I bid you adieu. See you whenever. Inshallah. Yeah.
A thriving news business. So again, anyone who wants to get involved, it's free. Come join us at Covering Climate Now. Just email us at editors@coveringclimatenow.org.
Repeat, repeat, repeat. That always works too. Thank you. Catherine, do you want just a final word? And
Absolutely.
then I'm going to conclude with David.
I'll be very quick. You know, we're talking about solutions journalism and the SDGs. And the SDGs framework may be more or less relevant in your lives depending on if you're actively working on these issues or not. But just to broaden this out, if you care about making progress on our shared global challenges, climate or any other global challenge, you should care about solutions journalism. I believe this deeply because when people don't see that progress is possible, they tune out. And if people tune out, we're not going to make progress on these issues. But when people see that there is a way forward and feel that sense of hope and agency, they tune in, they take action. So again, broadening this out. And I would hope we all care about making progress on these global challenges. Certainly if you're here in person or tuning in, you care. Then you should also care about solutions journalism, whether you're a journalist or not.
When people see progress is possible, they tune in. I know, just last thing is I know the Solutions Journalism